The morning sun
Please, I
painted
can't
golden
bear this
streaks
alone.
across the
I
ancient
am here,
stones
Your
of Windsor
Highness.
Castle
Thank
as
you.
Princess Charlotte walked through the East Terrace garden. Her usual bright smile was nowhere to be found. The 8-year-old princess, who was known throughout the kingdom for her infectious laughter and cheerful disposition, had been unusually quiet for 3 days now. Royal Protection Officer James Morrison watched from a respectful distance. In his 15 years of service to the royal family, he had never seen the young princess look so troubled. Her small shoulders seemed to carry a weight far too heavy for someone her age. The other members of the Royal Protection Team had noticed it too, but protocol demanded they maintain their professional distance. James was different from the other guards. He had a daughter Charlotte's age, and something about the princess's sudden change in behavior reminded him of the times his own child had struggled with problems she couldn't put into words. The protective instinct that made him excellent at his job was now telling him that something was seriously wrong. The princess sat down on her favorite bench near the rose garden. It was the same spot where she usually fed the palace cats and giggled at their playful antics. Today, she simply stared at the fountain, her small hands folded in her lap. Even the arrival of Duchess, her favorite palace cat, couldn't bring a smile to her face. James noticed that Charlotte kept looking toward the main castle building, specifically at the windows of the private family quarters. There was something in her expression that looked almost like fear. It wasn't the kind of fear a child might have of monsters under the bed or scary movies. This was something deeper, more real. As the morning progressed, other staff members began to take notice. Eleanor Hartwell, Charlotte's favorite housemaid, mentioned to James that the princess had barely touched her breakfast for the 3rd day running. The kitchen staff reported that she had turned down her favorite strawberry tart, something that had never happened before. "She's always been such a happy child," Mrs. Hartwell confided to James during a brief conversation near the servants' entrance. "Yesterday, I found her hiding in the library's reading nook, and when I asked if she was playing hide-and-seek, she just shook her head. She looked like she'd been crying." James felt a knot forming in his stomach. In his experience, when children suddenly changed their behavior so drastically, it usually meant one of two things. Either they were seriously ill, or something had happened that they didn't know how to talk about. Given that the princess had seen the royal physician just last week for her regular checkup and been given a clean bill of health, James feared it might be the latter. The afternoon brought the arrival of Prince William and Catherine for their weekly family lunch. James positioned himself near the main entrance, as was his usual post during family gatherings. He watched as Charlotte ran to greet her parents, but even then, her smile seemed forced and didn't reach her eyes. During lunch, James could hear voices from the dining room through the slightly open window. Charlotte's voice was notably quieter than usual, and he could hear Catherine asking gentle questions about school and friends. The princess's responses were brief and subdued, so different from her typical animated chatter about her latest adventures and discoveries. After lunch, while the family took tea in the blue drawing room, James noticed something that made his blood run cold. As Charlotte walked past one of the castle's longtime staff members, she instinctively stepped away, pressing herself closer to her mother's side. The staff member seemed surprised by this reaction. As Charlotte had always been friendly with everyone at the castle, James began to piece together a troubling pattern. The princess's behavior change had started exactly 3 days ago, following a private function at the castle. Several external contractors and temporary staff had been brought in for the event. Standard security protocols had been followed, but James realized that in the busy atmosphere of the preparation, people had more access to different areas of the castle than usual. That evening, as James completed his shift report, he found himself staring at the page for a long time before writing anything. Protocol dictated that he should only report security-related observations, but his gut told him that this situation might indeed be security-related in ways that weren't immediately obvious. He thought about his own daughter and how she had once become withdrawn after a difficult experience at school. It had taken weeks of patient questioning before she felt safe enough to tell him what had happened. The memory of that time reminded him that children often protected adults by keeping quiet about things that hurt or scared them. James made a decision that would go against 15 years of protocol training. He couldn't simply stand by and watch a child suffer in silence, even if that child happened to be a princess. But approaching the royal family directly was not an option for someone of his position. He needed to find another way. The next morning, James arrived at work earlier than usual. He spent extra time reviewing the security footage from the past week, looking for anything that might explain Charlotte's sudden change. The cameras covered all public areas of the castle, but private family quarters and certain staff areas were off-limits for privacy reasons. As he watched the footage from the evening of the private function, James noticed something that made him pause. In one clip, he could see Charlotte walking alone down a corridor that should have been restricted during the event. She was followed moments later by a figure that James didn't immediately recognize. James enhanced the image as much as the system would allow. The person appeared to be wearing the uniform of the catering staff, but something about their behavior seemed off. They had waited until Charlotte was alone before following her, and they moved with a purpose that didn't seem consistent with their supposed role at the event. The footage showed them disappearing around a corner, into an area where the cameras didn't reach. Charlotte didn't reappear for nearly 20 minutes, and when she did, James could see even in the grainy security footage that something had changed. Her posture was different, more guarded, and she kept looking over her shoulder. James felt a chill run down his spine. In his years of protection work, he had been trained to recognize the signs of children who had been approached inappropriately by adults. Everything he was observing about Charlotte's behavior fit the pattern perfectly. But he also knew that making accusations without concrete proof could destroy careers and lives. He needed more information, but getting it would require him to step far outside his normal duties. The question was whether he was willing to risk his own position to protect a child who couldn't protect herself. As James walked through the castle that morning, he made careful note of all the staff members who had access during the private function. He also began to pay closer attention to how Charlotte interacted with different people. The pattern he observed was troubling but consistent. Charlotte seemed comfortable with the long-term female staff members and the royal family, but she showed visible anxiety around certain male staff members, particularly those she didn't know well. When the head groundskeeper approached to show her a new butterfly garden, she politely declined and moved closer to Mrs. P. Hartwell. Most telling was Charlotte's reaction when one of the temporary kitchen staff members passed through the main hall during the afternoon. James watched as the princess quickly ducked behind a pillar and didn't emerge until the man had completely left the area. The level of fear in her body language was unmistakable. That evening, James made another decision that went against his training. He approached Mrs. Hartwell privately as she finished her duties for the day. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to keep it between us for now." Mrs. Hartwell, who had worked at the castle for over 20 years, immediately sensed the seriousness in his tone. "What is it, James? Have you noticed anything unusual about Princess Charlotte lately? Any changes in her behavior or things she's said?" Eleanor's expression grew worried. "I was hoping someone else had noticed. She's been having nightmares, James. I've heard her crying in her room late at night, and yesterday, when I was helping her choose clothes for the day, I noticed she's been insisting on wearing long sleeves and high necklines, even though the weather's been warm." James felt his heart sink. Long sleeves in warm weather was another classic sign that something inappropriate might have happened. Children often tried to cover themselves when they felt ashamed or confused about something that had been done to them. "Has she said anything specific?" James asked. "Not directly, but yesterday she asked me a strange question. She wanted to know if there were some secrets that she should never tell, even to her parents. When I told her that she should always be able to tell her mummy and daddy anything, she got very quiet and said that sometimes telling might make things worse for everyone." James felt anger building in his chest. Someone had clearly told Charlotte that she shouldn't speak about what had happened to her. The sophistication of that manipulation suggested that whoever was responsible was experienced in silencing children. "Eleanor, I need you to do something for me," James said. "Can you try to spend more time with her over the next few days? Don't ask direct questions, but if she wants to talk about anything, listen carefully and remember every word." Mrs. Miller Hartwell nodded grimly. "I've been trying to do that already." "James, do you think someone has hurt our little princess?" James looked toward the family quarters where Charlotte was probably getting ready for bed. "I think someone has done something to frighten her badly, and they've made her believe she can't tell anyone about it. But we're going to find out what happened, and we're going to make sure she's safe." As James walked to his car that night, he knew he was about to embark on an investigation that could end his career if he was wrong. But as he thought about his own daughter sleeping safely at home, He also knew he couldn't live with himself if he did nothing, and later discovered that his suspicions had been correct. The next phase of his unofficial investigation would require him to ask questions that no one in his position was supposed to ask. He would have to be careful, clever, and above all determined to uncover the truth, no matter what the personal cost might be. Tomorrow, James Morrison would begin asking the questions that no one dared to ask because a little girl's safety was more important than protocol, career advancement, or royal discretion. The princess had stopped smiling, and someone was going to answer for that. James Morrison arrived at Windsor Castle the next morning with a plan that would require every ounce of his investigative skills and diplomatic finesse. He had spent most of the night researching child protection protocols and thinking about how to conduct his inquiry without raising suspicions or potentially damaging an innocent person's reputation. His first step was to review the employment records of everyone who had worked at the castle during the private function. As a senior protection officer, he had legitimate access to background check information and employment histories. What he found in the temporary staff files made him even more concerned. One name stood out immediately: David Thornton, hired through a catering agency for a one-day assignment. Unlike the other temporary workers whose files contained comprehensive background checks and multiple references, Thornton's file was surprisingly thin. The agency had provided minimal information, and the background check appeared to have been rushed through just days before the event. James cross-referenced Thornton's information with national databases he had access to through his security clearance. What he discovered made his hands shake as he typed. David Thornton had been questioned by police in 2 separate incidents involving inappropriate contact with minors, though no charges had been filed due to insufficient evidence. The pattern was deeply troubling. In both cases, Thornton had been working temporary positions that gave him access to children, and in both cases the children had been too frightened or confused to provide clear testimony. The lack of charges meant that standard employment background checks wouldn't necessarily flag him as a risk. James printed out the information and secured it in his personal locker. He now had a suspect, but he still needed to establish whether Thornton had actually interacted with Princess Charlotte during the event, and if so, what had transpired between them. His next challenge was finding a way to speak with Charlotte directly without violating protocol or potentially traumatizing her further. Royal children were carefully protected from questioning by anyone outside the immediate family and specifically designated caregivers. James knew that approaching her directly could result in his immediate dismissal and possible criminal charges. However, James had an advantage that he decided to use carefully. His own daughter Emma was exactly Charlotte's age and attended a private school that occasionally participated in royal charitable events. Emma was a bright, compassionate child who had met Charlotte briefly at a children's charity function 6 months earlier. That evening, James sat down with Emma in their kitchen and chose his words very carefully. "Emma, do you remember meeting Princess Charlotte at the Children's Hospital event?" Emma's face lit up immediately. "Oh, yes, Daddy!" She was so nice. "We talked about horses and books. She loves the same series I do. I need to ask you something important, and I need you to be very grown-up about it," James said. "Sometimes when children have something scary or confusing happen to them, they don't know how to tell adults about it. If something like that happened to one of your friends, how do you think they would act?" Emma considered this seriously. "Well, Sarah got really quiet last year after something happened at her uncle's house. She didn't want to play anymore, and she started having bad dreams. Mummy said sometimes adults do things that make children feel scared and confused, and it's not the child's fault, but they might feel like it is." James felt proud of his daughter's emotional intelligence while simultaneously feeling sick about why he was having this conversation. "If you saw Princess Charlotte again, and she seemed sad or scared like your friend Sarah did, what would you say to her?" "I would tell her that she could talk to me because sometimes it's easier to tell another kid than to tell grown-ups. And I would tell her that whatever happened wasn't her fault, even if someone told her it was." James realized that Emma might be able to help in a way that he never could. Children often confided in other children when they couldn't bring themselves to tell adults. But arranging a meeting would be extremely difficult and would require involving other people in his investigation. The next morning, James approached Mrs. Hartwell again. He had decided to trust her completely, both because he needed an ally and because her genuine love for Charlotte was obvious to anyone who observed them together. "Eleanor, I need to tell you what I've discovered. But first I need your word that you won't repeat this to anyone until we decide together what to do with the information." Mrs. Hartwell's expression grew grave as she nodded her agreement. James explained about David Thornton's background and the security footage that showed him following Charlotte during the private function. He watched Eleanor's face grow pale as she absorbed the implications. "That monster," she whispered. "I remember him now. He kept asking questions about the family's schedule and which areas of the castle the children had access to. I thought he was just being curious about working in such a famous place. Did you see him interact with Charlotte specifically?" "Not directly, but I remember one of the other kitchen staff mentioning that he had volunteered to deliver some refreshments to the family quarters. That was unusual because temporary staff aren't normally allowed in those areas." James felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. Thornton had specifically maneuvered to gain access to Charlotte, which suggested premeditation rather than a crime of opportunity. "Eleanor, Charlotte trusts you more than almost anyone. Do you think there's a way you could encourage her to talk about what happened that night without making her feel like she's being questioned?" Mrs. Hartwell thought for a moment. She's been spending a lot of time in the castle library lately, hiding in the children's reading corner. I could join her there and perhaps read some stories that might help her feel safe talking about difficult things. It was a good plan, but James knew they needed to be extremely careful. If Charlotte had been threatened into silence, pushing too hard could make her withdraw even further or could put her in danger if the perpetrator realized they were being investigated. Over the next 2 days, Mrs. Hartwell spent increased time with Charlotte, following her lead and providing gentle opportunities for conversation. What she reported back to James was heartbreaking but valuable. "She's having nightmares about the mean man who takes pictures," Eleanor reported. "Yesterday she drew a picture of herself, but she colored over the face completely with black crayon. When I asked her why, she said sometimes people do things that make you want to disappear." The mention of pictures made James's blood run cold. If Thornton had photographed Charlotte inappropriately, it meant the crime had potentially permanent consequences and could involve child exploitation networks. James realized he was reaching the limits of what he could investigate alone. The situation was becoming more serious than he had initially feared, and Charlotte's safety might depend on involving law enforcement. However, doing so would create a massive scandal for the royal family and could expose Charlotte to intense public scrutiny. He decided to take one more step before involving outside authorities. James arranged to meet privately with Detective Inspector Sarah Collins, a specialist in child protection who had worked with the Royal Protection Unit on previous occasions. Collins was known for her discretion and her expertise in handling sensitive cases involving high-profile families. The meeting took place at a quiet cafe far from Windsor Castle. James explained everything he had discovered and observed, emphasizing that his concerns were based on professional experience and concrete evidence rather than speculation. Detective Inspector Collins listened carefully, taking detailed notes and asking pointed questions about the timeline and evidence. "James, based on what you've told me, there's definitely grounds for a formal investigation. However, given the sensitivity of the situation, we need to be extremely strategic about how we proceed. If we move too quickly or carelessly, we could traumatize the victim further, or allow the perpetrator to destroy evidence or disappear." She explained that child exploitation cases often involved networks of offenders, and that Thornton might not be working alone if he had been taking photographs. Those images could be circulating among other predators, putting not just Charlotte but other children at risk. "The first priority is ensuring Charlotte's immediate safety," Collins continued. "Then we need to gather enough evidence to identify all the perpetrators and victims. This is going to require the cooperation of the royal family, which means someone needs to tell them what's happening." James felt the weight of that responsibility settling on his shoulders. Breaking protocol to investigate had been one thing, but approaching the royal family directly with allegations of child abuse was something entirely different. However, he also realized that Charlotte's parents had a right to know that their daughter was in danger. "I'll speak to Prince William," James said finally. "He's served in the military and understands security concerns. If I present this as a potential threat to Charlotte's safety, he'll listen." Detective Inspector Collins nodded. "I'll begin preparing for a formal investigation on our end." We'll need to coordinate with child protection services and potentially with international law enforcement if this involves online networks. As James drove back to Windsor Castle that afternoon, he rehearsed what he would say to Prince William. He knew he was about to have the most important conversation of his career, and possibly the most important conversation in protecting a child who couldn't protect herself. That evening, as Charlotte's family gathered for dinner, James requested a private audience with Prince William. The request was unusual enough that it was granted immediately, and James found himself standing in the prince's private study, looking at a man who was about to learn that his daughter was a victim of a predator. "Your Royal Highness," James began, "I need to inform you of a potential security threat involving Princess Charlotte. What I'm about to tell you is disturbing, but I believe it's essential for her safety that you know immediately." Prince William's expression grew serious as James began to explain everything he had discovered. James watched as the prince's face cycled through disbelief, anger, and fierce protective determination. "Are you certain about these allegations?" Prince William asked when James finished. "I'm certain enough that I've risked my career to investigate them, sir, and I'm certain enough that I've already involved law enforcement, with your permission." Prince William was quiet for a long moment, and James could see him processing the implications not just for Charlotte's safety, but for the family's privacy and the monarchy's reputation. "What do you recommend as our next steps?" the prince asked finally. "We need to have Charlotte examined by a specialist who can determine whether she's been physically harmed. We need to arrange for her to speak with a trained child psychologist who can help her feel safe enough to tell us what happened. And we need to coordinate with law enforcement to find Thornton and anyone who might be working with him." Prince William nodded grimly. "And we need to do all of this while protecting Charlotte from media attention and ensuring that whoever did this never has the opportunity to hurt another child." As James left the meeting, he felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The investigation was no longer his responsibility alone, but he knew that the hardest part was just beginning. Charlotte would need to relive her trauma in order to help catch her attacker, and the royal family would have to navigate the delicate balance between protecting their daughter and ensuring that justice was served. Tomorrow would bring child protection specialists, forensic experts, and the beginning of an investigation that would test everyone involved. But tonight, James felt that he had done the right thing by asking the questions that no one else had dared to ask. The morning after James's conversation with Prince William, Windsor Castle became the center of a carefully orchestrated investigation unlike anything in royal history. Child protection specialists, forensic experts, and specially trained detectives arrived through private entrances, their presence hidden from both the media and most of the castle staff. Dr. Rachel Morrison, one of Britain's leading child psychologists, had been personally requested by Prince William to lead Charlotte's care. Morrison specialized in helping young victims of abuse feel safe enough to communicate their experiences without causing further trauma. Princess Catherine had spent most of the night in Charlotte's room, simply holding her daughter while trying to process the possibility that someone had hurt her child. When morning came, she was determined to be present for every step of the process, regardless of how difficult it might be to hear. The first priority was a medical examination. Dr. Sarah Chen, a pediatric specialist with extensive experience in abuse cases, arrived at the castle with equipment that would allow her to conduct a thorough examination in the privacy and comfort of Charlotte's own quarters. James found himself in an unprecedented position. Usually, his job was to keep people away from the royal family. Now, he was facilitating the arrival of strangers who needed intimate access to investigate a crime against a child he had sworn to protect. The medical examination took place in Charlotte's bedroom, with Princess Catherine present throughout. Dr. Chen worked slowly and gently, explaining each step to Charlotte in age-appropriate language and giving her control over the process whenever possible. The results were both relieving and disturbing. While there was no evidence of physical sexual assault, Dr. Chen found indicators consistent with inappropriate touching and discovered several small bruises on Charlotte's arms that were consistent with being grabbed firmly by an adult. "These bruises are about a week old, Dr. Piss," Chen explained quietly to Prince William and Catherine after the examination. "They suggest that Charlotte was restrained or held against her will, but there's no evidence of more serious physical assault." While the news was better than they had feared, it confirmed that Charlotte had indeed been victimized. The focus now shifted to helping her communicate what had happened so that the perpetrator could be caught and other potential victims identified. Dr. Morrison's approach with Charlotte was masterful in its sensitivity. Rather than asking direct questions about traumatic events, she began by simply playing with Charlotte and establishing trust. She brought art supplies, dolls, and picture books that could help a child express difficult experiences indirectly. James observed from a distance as Dr. Morrison worked with Charlotte throughout the morning. The princess was initially shy and guarded, but the psychologist's gentle approach gradually helped her relax. When Charlotte began drawing, James noticed that her artwork consistently included dark figures and images of hiding. Meanwhile, Detective Inspector Collins had established a command center in one of the castle's unused offices. The investigation had expanded beyond just finding David Thornton. Digital forensics experts were analyzing the castle's security systems and looking for any evidence that photographs or videos had been taken. The catering agency that had provided Thornton was being investigated thoroughly. What they discovered was deeply troubling. The agency had several gaps in their screening process, and Thornton had used false references to obtain the position. More concerning, they found evidence suggesting that Thornton had specifically sought out assignments that would give him access to high-profile families with children. James was called in to review additional security footage with the digital forensics team. Using enhanced analysis techniques, they were able to piece together a more complete timeline of Thornton's movements during the evening of the private function. The footage showed Thornton systematically observing the royal children throughout the evening, noting their routines and identifying when they were most likely to be alone. He had clearly been planning his approach to Charlotte rather than acting impulsively. Most damaging was footage from a corridor camera that captured Thornton following Charlotte toward the family's private quarters. While the camera couldn't see into the private areas, it recorded Thornton emerging 23 minutes later, adjusting his clothing and looking around nervously before returning to the kitchen area. This level of premeditation suggests he's done this before, Detective Inspector Collins explained to James. We're coordinating with police forces nationwide to see if we can connect him to other incidents. The investigation team also discovered something that made everyone's blood run cold. Hidden in Thornton's personal belongings, which had been left in the staff changing area, they found a small digital camera and a smartphone with encrypted messaging applications. Forensic analysis of the devices revealed hundreds of photographs of children taken without their knowledge or consent. Many appeared to have been taken at various events and locations where Thornton had worked temporarily. Even more disturbing were the encrypted messages showing that he was part of a network that shared such images and information about potential targets. Among the photographs, investigators found several images of Charlotte taken during the evening at Windsor Castle. While the images weren't explicitly sexual in nature, they had clearly been taken without permission and showed Charlotte in vulnerable moments when she thought she was alone. Prince William's reaction to this news was controlled fury. "How many other children has this monster targeted?" he asked Detective Inspector Collins. "And how many people knew what he was doing?" The investigation was revealing a sophisticated network of individuals who shared information about high-profile families, their schedules, and their children's activities. Thornton was not a lone predator, but part of a larger conspiracy that had been operating for years. As the technical investigation continued, Dr. Morrison made a breakthrough with Charlotte. Using play therapy techniques, she had helped Charlotte create a story using dolls that mirrored her traumatic experience. In Charlotte's story, a bad cook man had approached the princess doll when she was alone in the castle. He had told her that he needed to take special pictures of her for her parents, but that it had to be a secret surprise. When the princess doll had tried to leave, the bad man had grabbed her arms and told her that if she ever told anyone about the pictures, something terrible would happen to her family. Dr. Morrison recorded the session carefully, documenting Charlotte's words and behaviors in a way that would be admissible as evidence, while ensuring that Charlotte felt safe and in control throughout the process. The breakthrough came when Charlotte used the dolls to show how the bad man had made her pose for pictures and had touched her inappropriately while doing so. Charlotte's account was consistent with the physical evidence Dr. Chen had found and provided crucial details about Thornton's methods. Most importantly, Charlotte revealed that Thornton had shown her photographs of other children on his phone and had told her that all these children had kept the secret, so she should too. This information confirmed that there were other victims, and gave investigators valuable leads to pursue. Princess Catherine was present for this session, and James could see her struggle to maintain composure as her daughter revealed what had been done to her. The protective fury in her expression reminded James of his own feelings when he first suspected that Charlotte was in danger. Armed with Charlotte's testimony and the physical evidence, law enforcement moved quickly to locate Thornton. The catering agency had provided an address that turned out to be false, but investigators were able to trace his identity through financial records and digital footprints. The search led them to a small flat in South London, where they discovered a sophisticated operation for creating and distributing child exploitation material. Thornton lived alone but clearly worked with associates who helped him identify targets and gain access to children. When police raided the flat, they found extensive files on dozens of families, including detailed information about children's schedules, habits, and security arrangements. The royal family was just one of many high-profile targets, though Charlotte appeared to have been specifically prioritized due to her age and public profile. Thornton was not at the flat when police arrived, but they found evidence suggesting he had left hurriedly after learning that Charlotte's behavior changes had been noticed. Computer analysis revealed that he had been monitoring news about the royal family obsessively, watching for any sign that his attack on Charlotte had been discovered. The investigation team realized that Thornton's network had sophisticated methods for monitoring their potential exposure. They had contacts within various service industries, who could warn them if families became suspicious or if law enforcement began investigating. This discovery led to a broader investigation involving multiple law enforcement agencies. The network appeared to involve dozens of individuals across various professions who had access to wealthy and famous families. The scope of the conspiracy was far larger than anyone had initially imagined. James found himself in the unusual position of coordinating between the Royal Protection Team and multiple law enforcement agencies. His decision to investigate Charlotte's behavioral changes had uncovered not just an attack on one child, but an entire criminal enterprise that had been operating undetected for years. As the day progressed, arrest warrants were issued for multiple suspects connected to the network. The investigation had expanded to include international law enforcement, as evidence suggested that the network had been sharing materials and information globally. Prince William called James into another private meeting that evening. The prince looked exhausted but determined as he thanked James for his initiative in protecting Charlotte. "James, I want you to know that your actions may have saved not just Charlotte, but countless other children who were being targeted by this network," Prince William said. "Your willingness to ask difficult questions and pursue uncomfortable truths has made an enormous difference." James felt a mixture of relief and continued concern. While they had made significant progress in understanding what had happened to Charlotte, Thornton himself was still at large, and the full extent of the network remained unknown. "Sir, with your permission, I'd like to continue working with the investigation team until we've caught everyone involved," James said. "Charlotte won't be truly safe until this entire network is shut down." Prince William nodded. "I was hoping you would say that. Detective Inspector Collins has requested that you be assigned to the task force full-time. Your insights into royal security and your dedication to Charlotte's safety make you invaluable to this investigation." As James left the meeting, he reflected on how much had changed since he first noticed Charlotte's subdued behavior. What had started as one guard's concern for a troubled child had evolved into a major criminal investigation with international implications. Charlotte was beginning to heal under Dr. Morrison's care, but James knew that true justice would require catching not just Thornton, but everyone who had enabled his crimes. The network that had targeted Charlotte was still out there, and they would continue to threaten other children until they were stopped completely. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the investigation expanded, but tonight, James felt confident that they were on the right path. The questions he had dared to ask were leading to answers that could protect children far beyond the walls of Windsor Castle. 3 weeks had passed since the investigation began, and James Morrison found himself working 18-hour days as part of Operation Safeguard, the task force established to dismantle the network that had targeted Princess Charlotte. The investigation had expanded far beyond anyone's initial expectations, revealing a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had been operating for over 5 years. The breakthrough came when digital forensics experts cracked the encryption on Thornton's communication devices. What they discovered was a meticulously organized network of over 40 individuals across Europe and North America, all working together to identify, access, and exploit children from wealthy and prominent families. Detective Inspector Collins briefed James on the latest developments in their temporary command center, now permanently established in a secure government building in London. The walls were covered with photographs, timeline charts, and connection maps that looked more like something from a spy thriller than a child protection investigation. "We've identified the network's organizational structure," Collins explained, pointing to a complex diagram showing various roles and relationships. Thornton was what they called a collector, someone who gained direct access to children and obtained compromising materials. But he was just one part of a much larger operation. The network included scouts who identified potential targets by monitoring social media and public events, facilitators who helped collectors gain access through employment agencies and service companies, technicians who handled digital security and distribution, and customers who paid significant amounts of money for access to the materials and information. Most disturbing was the discovery that the network had been specifically targeting children from high-profile families for years. They had detailed files on hundreds of children, including members of various royal families, celebrity offspring, and children of wealthy business leaders across multiple countries. Princess Charlotte wasn't randomly chosen, Collins continued. She was specifically selected because of her age, her public profile, and what they perceived as security vulnerabilities during public events. The investigation had led to arrests in 6 countries, but Thornton himself remained elusive. Intelligence suggested that he had fled to Eastern Europe, where the network had established safe houses and new identities for members who became exposed. James divided his time between the investigation and his continued duties protecting the royal family. Charlotte's recovery had been remarkable under Dr. History. Morrison's care, but the process of healing was ongoing and required careful attention to her emotional needs. The princess had gradually begun to smile again, though James noticed that she remained more cautious than before. She stayed closer to trusted adults and was more selective about interacting with new people. Morrison assured everyone that this increased wariness was normal and healthy for someone who had experienced what Charlotte had endured. "She's developing appropriate protective instincts," Dr. Morrison explained to Prince William and Catherine during one of their regular meetings. "The goal isn't to return her to exactly who she was before, but to help her grow into someone who feels safe and confident while also being appropriately cautious." Charlotte had also become something of a hero among the other children who had been identified as victims of the network. Through careful coordination between child protection services in multiple countries, several young victims had been able to participate in age-appropriate group therapy sessions via secure video connections. James was struck by Charlotte's maturity and compassion as she spoke with other children who had experienced similar traumas. Despite her own pain, she consistently offered comfort and encouragement to others, telling them that they were brave and that speaking out had helped catch the bad people. The investigation team had also uncovered evidence of the network's plans for future operations. Among Thornton's seized materials, they found detailed surveillance reports on upcoming royal events, celebrity charity functions, and private school activities where prominent families' children would be present. They weren't just exploiting children, James realized as he reviewed the intelligence reports. They were building a systematic approach to accessing and victimizing an entire generation of high-profile children. The scope of the conspiracy explained why it had operated undetected for so long. The network had infiltrated legitimate businesses across the service industry, creating a pipeline of access to exclusive events and private residences. Background check systems had been compromised, and some employment agencies were discovered to be entirely controlled by network associates. International law enforcement coordination had become crucial as evidence emerged that the network had been sharing intelligence and resources across borders. Children who had been victimized in London were being exploited by associates in New York, while materials obtained in Paris were being distributed to customers in Asia. James received a call one morning that changed the direction of the entire investigation. An anonymous tip, later traced to someone within the network who had decided to cooperate with authorities, revealed that Thornton was planning to return to the United Kingdom for what the network called a final collection operation. The intelligence suggested that Thornton had become obsessed with obtaining additional materials involving Princess Charlotte. believing that the increased security and media attention around the case had made such materials extraordinarily valuable to the network's customers. He's planning to come back for her, Detective Inspector Collins explained grimly during an emergency briefing. Our sources indicate that he believes he can use the ongoing investigation to his advantage, possibly by gaining access during a public event where security might be distracted. This revelation led to an immediate escalation in Charlotte's protection. James found himself coordinating with counterterrorism specialists and international security experts to develop protocols that could protect the princess while still allowing the investigation to continue. The plan they developed was ambitious and dangerous. Using Charlotte as bait was absolutely unacceptable, but they realized they could use Thornton's obsession with her to draw him into a controlled situation where he could be captured safely. Working with behavioral specialists and tactical teams, they identified an upcoming charity event at Windsor Castle that would provide the perfect opportunity. The event was already scheduled, would have extensive legitimate security presence, and could be modified to create the kind of access points that Thornton would likely try to exploit. James felt conflicted about using any event involving Charlotte for law enforcement purposes, but Prince William and Catherine agreed that stopping Thornton permanently was worth the carefully calculated risk. Charlotte herself, with age-appropriate explanation from Dr. Morrison, agreed to participate in the operation. "I want to help catch the bad man so he can't hurt other children," Charlotte told her parents with a seriousness that was both admirable and heartbreaking in someone her age. The charity event was scheduled for the following Saturday. Intelligence suggested that Thornton would attempt to infiltrate the catering staff again, using forged credentials and a new identity that the network had prepared for him. James worked with the tactical team to ensure that every possible entry point was monitored and that Charlotte would never be in actual danger. The plan involved allowing Thornton to believe he had successfully gained access, while actually being under constant surveillance from the moment he entered the castle grounds. Dr. Morrison spent extensive time with Charlotte, preparing her psychologically for the possibility of seeing Thornton again, and ensuring that she understood her role in keeping herself and others safe. Charlotte's courage throughout this preparation was extraordinary, though James could see the strain it placed on her young mind. The week leading up to the operation was tense for everyone involved. James found himself checking and rechecking every security detail, knowing that one mistake could put Charlotte in genuine danger or allow Thornton to escape again. Prince William pulled James aside 2 days before the event. "James, I want you to know that Catherine and I trust you completely with Charlotte's safety. You've already gone far beyond what anyone could have expected to protect our daughter." "Sir, I won't let anything happen to her," James replied. "This man has already hurt her once. I'm going to make sure he never gets the chance to hurt any child again." As the day of the operation approached, James reflected on how far they had all come since he first noticed Charlotte's behavioral changes. What had started with one guard asking uncomfortable questions had evolved into an international investigation that was about to culminate in a carefully orchestrated operation to capture a dangerous predator. The network's other members were being arrested simultaneously in multiple countries, timed to prevent them from warning Thornton about the trap being set for him. The coordination required was unprecedented, involving law enforcement agencies from 12 different nations. Friday evening, James conducted his final security briefing with the tactical team. Every member of the operation understood that they were protecting not just Princess Charlotte, but potentially dozens of other children who remained at risk as long as Thornton was free. "Tomorrow we finish what we started," Detective Inspector Collins told the assembled team. "This network has operated in the shadows for too long, targeting vulnerable children and destroying families. Tomorrow we make sure they can never do it again." As James walked through Windsor Castle that evening, checking security positions one final time, he thought about all the children who had been victimized by this network. Charlotte's courage in speaking out had given them the breakthrough they needed, but tomorrow would determine whether that courage had been enough to stop the predators who had caused so much suffering. The operation would require perfect timing, flawless execution, and more than a little luck. But as James looked toward the family quarters where Charlotte was probably getting ready for bed, he knew that everyone involved was motivated by the same determination that had driven his investigation from the beginning. No child should have to stop smiling because of what adults had done to them. Tomorrow they would make sure that David Thornton could never steal another child's innocence or joy. The questions James had dared to ask were about to receive their final definitive answers. Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear over Windsor Castle as James Morrison arrived before sunrise to conduct final preparations for Operation Safeguard. The charity event would begin at 10 o'clock, but the tactical team had been in position since 4 in the morning, carefully concealed throughout the castle grounds and surrounding areas. James wore his standard Royal Protection uniform, but beneath it was a sophisticated communication system that connected him to Detective Inspector Collins and the Tactical Command Center established in the castle's security office. Every movement, every conversation, and every potential threat would be monitored in real time. Princess Charlotte appeared remarkably composed during breakfast with her family. Morrison had spent the previous evening with her, using visualization techniques and role-playing exercises to help her feel prepared and empowered for what might happen during the day. "Remember, darling," Princess Catherine said gently as she helped Charlotte choose her outfit for the event. "You're surrounded by people who love you and will keep you safe. If you feel scared or uncomfortable at any time, just find James or Mrs. Hartwell or come straight to Daddy or me." Charlotte nodded seriously, then surprised everyone by saying, "Mummy, I know the bad man might come today, but I'm not as scared as I was before because now I know that the grown-ups believe me and want to help." The wisdom and resilience in her words brought tears to Catherine's eyes, even as she marveled at her daughter's courage. At 8:30, the catering staff began arriving for the charity event. James positioned himself near the staff entrance, carefully observing each person who entered. The legitimate catering company had been thoroughly vetted and every staff member had been photographed and cleared by security. But intelligence suggested that Thornton would attempt to infiltrate using forged credentials. The first sign that something was amiss came at 9:15, when one of the catering supervisors reported that an additional staff member had shown up who wasn't on their original roster. The man claimed there had been a last-minute scheduling change and produced what appeared to be legitimate paperwork. James felt his pulse quicken as he received the description through his earpiece. The man matched Thornton's general appearance, though he had clearly altered his appearance with hair dye and facial hair. More telling was his behavior. He kept asking questions about the event schedule and seemed particularly interested in when the royal children would be present. "Possible target identified," James reported quietly into his communication device. "Male, approximately 40 years old, brown hair, beard, wearing catering uniform number 742, requesting verification." Within minutes, facial recognition software confirmed what James already suspected. Despite the physical alterations, biometric analysis indicated a 93% probability that the man was David Thornton. The tactical team moved into position around the castle, but they had agreed to let Thornton believe his infiltration was successful until he made a move toward Charlotte. The goal was to catch him in the act of attempting to approach her, providing irrefutable evidence of his intentions. James watched Thornton throughout the morning, noting how he systematically observed the event layout and security positions. Thornton clearly had experience with this kind of operation. He moved naturally through the catering setup, while constantly gathering intelligence about the royal family's location and movements. At 10:30, the charity event officially began. Families with children who had overcome serious illnesses were invited to spend time with the royal family in a carefully orchestrated but genuinely warm celebration. Charlotte moved among the guests with practiced grace, though James could see the extra attention she paid to her surroundings. Dr. Morrison remained close to Charlotte throughout the event, disguised as a family friend rather than a psychologist. Her presence provided Charlotte with additional emotional support while also giving her a trusted adult to signal if she felt unsafe. The moment everyone had been waiting for came at 11:15. Thornton had positioned himself near the refreshment table in a location that gave him a clear view of Charlotte's movements. James watched through the tactical team's surveillance as Thornton began moving toward an area where Charlotte would be relatively isolated from other guests. "Target is moving," James reported. "All units stand by." Thornton approached Charlotte with a tray of refreshments, using his catering role as a pretext for interaction. James could see Charlotte tense slightly as she recognized him, but she remembered her training and remained calm, while subtly moving toward Dr. Morrison. "Hello, Princess," Thornton said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I have some special treats from the kitchen. Would you like to come with me to see them?" Charlotte looked directly at him and spoke clearly enough for the surveillance equipment to record her words. "No, thank you. I don't go anywhere with strangers, and I remember you from before." Thornton's expression changed immediately. The friendly facade dropped, and James could see anger and desperation in his face. "You need to come with me now," Thornton said, reaching toward Charlotte's arm. "We have unfinished business." That was the signal the tactical team had been waiting for. James moved first, stepping between Thornton and Charlotte while speaking into his communication device. "Target has made contact. Moving to intercept." Thornton realized immediately that he had walked into a trap. He looked around wildly, searching for escape routes, but found himself surrounded by what he had assumed were ordinary event staff and guests, but were actually undercover officers. "David Thornton, you're under arrest," Detective Inspector Collins announced as she approached with her warrant visible. "You're being charged with child endangerment, assault, possession of child exploitation materials, and conspiracy to commit further offenses." Thornton's response was to attempt to grab Charlotte, possibly as a hostage to facilitate his escape. But James was ready for exactly this possibility. Using his military and protection training, he intercepted Thornton's reach and subdued him quickly and efficiently, ensuring that Charlotte was never in actual physical danger. The arrest happened so smoothly that most of the charity event guests didn't even realize what was occurring. Charlotte was immediately surrounded by her protection team and family, while Thornton was secured and removed from the premises in a way that drew minimal attention. "It's over, sweetheart," James told Charlotte as Prince William and Catherine rushed to her side. "The bad man can never hurt you or anyone else again." Charlotte looked up at James with eyes that seemed far older than her years. "Thank you for believing me when I couldn't find the words to tell anyone what happened." The aftermath of Thornton's arrest revealed the full scope of the international network's activities. Within hours of his capture, coordinated raids in 11 countries resulted in the arrest of 37 additional suspects. The network's digital infrastructure was dismantled, and thousands of victims were identified and connected with appropriate support services. Thornton's interrogation, conducted by specialists in child exploitation cases, revealed details that led to the rescue of dozens of children who were in immediate danger. His obsession with documenting his crimes provided investigators with evidence that would ensure convictions for the entire network. Most importantly for Charlotte's healing, Thornton's arrest and the destruction of his materials meant that the images taken of her would never be distributed or used to harm her further. Dr. Morrison explained to Charlotte that the bad man would be locked away for the rest of his life and could never hurt children again. In the weeks that followed, Charlotte's recovery accelerated dramatically. Knowing that Thornton was captured and that the threat was permanently removed allowed her to process her trauma without the fear that had been complicating her healing. James found himself recognized internationally for his role in uncovering and dismantling the network. Law enforcement agencies from multiple countries offered him positions, and child protection organizations sought his expertise in developing better protocols for identifying and investigating such cases. But when Prince William asked James what he wanted as recognition for his service, his answer was simple. "I want to continue protecting Charlotte and making sure that what happened to her never happens to any other child on my watch." 3 months after the arrests, James stood in the same East Terrace garden where he had first noticed Charlotte's distress. The princess was playing with several children from the charity event, her laughter carrying across the garden in a way that reminded everyone why their investigation had been so important. Charlotte ran over to James, her face bright with the smile that had been missing for so many weeks. "James, will you play hide-and-seek with us? I'm not scared of hiding anymore because I know that the people who love me will always find me." As James joined the children's game, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had started with one guard noticing that a child had stopped smiling and being willing to ask uncomfortable questions. It had required courage from Charlotte to speak her truth, dedication from investigators to follow the evidence wherever it led, and cooperation from multiple countries to ensure that justice was served. The network that had targeted Charlotte was gone, its members imprisoned, and its victims receiving the support they needed to heal. But most importantly, a little girl who had temporarily lost her smile had not only gotten it back, but had also helped ensure that countless other children would be protected from similar predators. Mrs. Hartwell approached James as the afternoon wound down. "You know, James, I've worked at this castle for over 20 years, and I've never seen anything like what you did for Princess Charlotte. You asked the questions that no one else dared to ask, and because of that, she's safe." James watched Charlotte playing with the other children, her joy and resilience evident in every movement. Everyone deserves to have someone who notices when they're hurting and cares enough to do something about it. Charlotte just happened to be lucky enough to have people around her who refused to look the other way. As the sun set over Windsor Castle that evening, James knew that his decision to investigate Charlotte's behavioral changes had been vindicated in every possible way. A child's smile had been restored, a criminal network had been destroyed, and the principle that protecting the innocent was more important than following protocol had been proven beyond any doubt. Princess Charlotte's laughter echoed across the garden one more time as she called goodnight to James before heading inside with her family. It was a sound that reminded everyone involved why some questions, no matter how difficult or uncomfortable, absolutely must be asked. The day Princess Charlotte stopped smiling had led to one of the most important investigations in modern law enforcement history. But more than that, it had proven that sometimes the most important acts of heroism come from ordinary people who simply refuse to ignore a child in need. James Morrison had asked the questions that no one dared to ask, and because of his courage, Princess Charlotte was smiling again. In the end, that was the only answer that truly mattered.